Captain Do-hyun Park stood at the observation deck of Moon Base Epsilon, his eyes fixed on the blue marble of Earth hanging in the distance. His hand tightened around the tactical tablet he was holding. The screen showed red dots spreading across Earth's surface like a disease. Each dot represented a Nexus Army stronghold. The quiet hum of the base's life support systems was broken by quick footsteps behind him. Lieutenant Jae-yun Lee rushed into the room, her face pale with worry. "Captain Park, we've lost contact with the Mars colony," she said, trying to catch her breath. "The Nexus forces have taken over the main communication hub." Do-hyun's face remained calm, but his jaw tightened slightly. Mars was humanity's largest off-world colony, home to over 50,000 people. Its fall meant that Moon Base Epsilon was now truly the last major human military installation in the solar system. "How many of our people made it out?" he asked, his voice steady. "Only 3 transport ships escaped. Most of them are heading here." Jae-yun paused, then added, "Sir, they're bringing wounded. Our medical bay is already at full capacity." Do-hyun walked to his desk and pulled up the base's blueprints on the large screen. Moon Base Epsilon had been built as a research station, not a fortress. Its walls weren't designed to withstand a serious military assault. Yet here they were, about to become humanity's last stand against an enemy that hadn't lost a single major battle. The Nexus Army had appeared 6 months ago. They came with their super soldiers, 8 feet tall, stronger than 10 men, and nearly impossible to kill with regular weapons. Their minds were enhanced too, able to process battlefield information faster than any human computer. They claimed to be doing the galaxy a favor by replacing inferior species with their perfect warriors. "Show me the latest battle footage from Mars," Do-hyun ordered. Jae-yun pulled up several video feeds on the main screen. Do-hyun watched carefully as Nexus soldiers tore through human defenses like paper. Their movements were perfect. Each step, each shot, each tactical decision executed with machine-like precision. But something caught his attention. "Play that section again," he said, pointing to one of the feeds. "The part where our forces tried that desperate flanking maneuver." The video showed a small group of human soldiers attempting an unusual attack pattern. For a brief moment, the Nexus soldiers had hesitated, their perfect formation breaking slightly before they adjusted. "Did you see that?" Do-hyun asked, his eyes lighting up with interest. "See what, sir?" They hesitated. When our soldiers did something unexpected, they had to pause to recalculate. Do-hyun replayed the sequence several more times. "Their responses are programmed." Jae-yun: "Perfect, but programmed." Before Jae-yun could respond, the base's alarms began blaring. Sergeant Ta-won Kim's voice came through the comm system. "Captain, we've detected 3 Nexus warships entering lunar orbit. They'll be in firing range in 20 minutes. Do-hyun looked at the tactical display, showing the approaching enemy ships. By all normal military calculations, Moon Base Epsilon wouldn't last an hour against such a force. The base had a garrison of just 200 soldiers. The approaching Nexus ships likely carried thousands of super soldiers. But Do-hyun's mind was already working in a different direction. He thought about his grandfather, who had taught him about the ancient Korean military strategists. "The most powerful enemy," his grandfather used to say, "is the one who thinks victory is certain." "Jae-yun, get me access to all the maintenance tunnels and storage areas, every single one." He started marking points on the base blueprint. "And find Sergeant Kim. Tell him to bring every piece of mining equipment we have in storage." "Mining equipment?" Jae-yun looked confused. "Sir, shouldn't we be preparing the defense turrets?" "The Nexus expects us to fight like soldiers," Do-hyun said, a slight smile forming on his face. "So we won't. We'll fight like survivors. Like humans who have spent their entire history turning disadvantages into victories." He turned to face the approaching enemy ships, his mind already forming plans that no super soldier would ever think to calculate. "They may be perfect warriors," he said quietly, But that's exactly why they'll never understand what I'm about to do. Lieutenant Jai Yun-Lee had never seen the base's storage levels so busy. Captain Do-hyun Park had ordered every piece of mining equipment, maintenance tool, and spare part to be brought out and organized. The usually quiet tunnels now echoed with the sounds of urgent work. "Sir, the Nexus ships will be in range in 10 minutes, she reported, checking her tablet. "Shouldn't we be at our battle stations?" Do-hyun was studying old mining maps of the lunar surface, his eyes moving quickly across the screen. "We are at our battle stations, Lieutenant, just not the ones they expect us to use." He turned to Sergeant Taewon Kim, who was directing a group of soldiers moving heavy mining drills. "Are the tunnel charges ready?" "Yes, sir," Taewon replied, though he looked uncertain. "But these are just simple mining explosives. They won't even scratch Nexus armor." "They're not meant to," Do-hyun said. He walked over to a large lunar map displayed on the wall. "Look here. The Nexus army has fought on hundreds of worlds. They've developed perfect tactics for every type of battlefield. But they've never fought on the moon." Jae-yun moved closer to the map. "What makes the moon so different?" "Everything." Do-hyun pointed to various marked locations. "The low gravity, the thick lunar dust, the fact that sound doesn't travel through vacuum, but most importantly, the ground beneath us. The moon is full of lava tubes and natural caves. Some go hundreds of meters deep." Understanding began to dawn on Jae-yun's face. "You're going to use the terrain against them. The Nexus thinks in straight lines. Attack, defend, advance, retreat. But humans—" Do-hyun smiled slightly. "We think in curves. We adapt. We turn nature itself into our weapon." A loud alarm blared through the base. The enemy ships had entered firing range. The base's outer sensors showed multiple dropships launching from the Nexus vessels. "They're sending in their first wave," Jae-yun reported. "Standard Nexus assault pattern. They'll land their ships in a circle around the base." "Perfect." Do-hyun turned to address the gathered soldiers. "Everyone knows their positions. Remember, we're not trying to beat them with strength. We're going to beat them with science." The soldiers moved quickly to their assigned places. Many carried mining tools instead of weapons. Some were hauling containers of lunar dust. Others were setting up old survey equipment modified for new purposes. Jae-yun watched the enemy dropships descending. "They're landing exactly where you predicted." "Of course they are," Do-hyun said. "Their tactical computers have calculated the optimal landing zones. What those computers don't know is that we've spent the last 15 minutes weakening the ground under those zones." Through the base's cameras, they watched as the first Nexus dropship landed. The massive vehicle touched down on the lunar surface with perfect precision. Then, exactly as Do-hyun had planned, the ground beneath it collapsed. The dropship fell into a carefully prepared crater, its angle making it impossible for the troops inside to deploy efficiently. Before the Nexus could react, similar collapses occurred at 2 other landing zones. "Now for Phase 2, Do-hyun said calmly. He activated his comlink. "All units, initiate dust protocol." Modified mining equipment, carefully positioned around the base, roared to life. They weren't being used to dig. Instead, they were throwing huge clouds of lunar dust into the airless space around the base. The super soldiers that had managed to deploy found themselves in a thick cloud of electrostatically charged dust. Their advanced sensors, designed to penetrate smoke and fog, were useless against the clinging particles that covered their visors and blocked their thermal imaging. "It's working," Jae-yun said with amazement. "Their formations are breaking up." Nexus soldiers are trained to maintain perfect unit cohesion, Do-hyun explained. "But they can't maintain formation if they can't see each other. They can't communicate effectively if their equipment is covered in dust, and in the moon's low gravity." He paused as they watched a Nexus soldier try to move quickly through the dust cloud. The super soldier's enhanced strength, normally an advantage, caused him to overcompensate in the low gravity. He tumbled awkwardly, unable to right himself quickly in the disorienting environment. Their greatest strengths become their weaknesses, Jai-yun finished. Do-hyun nodded. This is just the beginning. Humanity didn't survive this long by being the strongest. We survived by understanding our environment and using it to our advantage. And right now, these perfect soldiers are about to learn that lesson the hard way. Sergeant Ta-won Kim watched with growing respect as Captain Do-hyun Park explained his new battle strategy to the assembled soldiers in Moon Base Epsilon's main training room. The captain called it the Ghost Protocol, and it was unlike anything Ta-won had seen in his 15 years of military service. Traditional military tactics won't work against the Nexus, Do-hyun said, pointing to the holographic display showing their recent victory. But they've never faced an enemy who refuses to fight the way they expect. Lieutenant Jai-yun Lee stepped forward with new data from their first encounter. The dust cloud strategy bought us time, but the Nexus is already adapting. They're developing new filters for their visors. Exactly as we expected, Do-hyun replied. Which is why we're going to change everything about how we fight. No more fixed positions. No more direct confrontations. We become ghosts. He demonstrated by turning off the main lights in the training room, leaving only the dim emergency lighting. In Korean military history, there are stories of small forces defeating larger armies by becoming invisible. Not literally invisible, but unpredictable, untraceable. The captain picked up what looked like a modified mining laser. These tools were designed to cut through moon rocks. We've adjusted them to release short, powerful bursts. In the moon's low gravity, you can use the recoil to move quickly between positions. Ta-won watched as Do-hyun demonstrated. The captain fired the laser at a target, using the recoil to push himself in the opposite direction. In the low gravity, he moved like a ghost himself, touching down briefly before firing again and changing direction. But sir, one soldier spoke up, won't the Nexus sensors track our heat signatures? That's where these come in. Jai-yun held up what looked like small maintenance robots. We've reprogrammed them to generate false heat signatures, dozens of them, moving through the tunnels. The Nexus won't know which signals are real and which aren't. Over the next few hours, they'd practice their new tactics. Instead of moving as a unit, they learned to spread out and strike independently. They used the mining tools in ways their designers never imagined. Drilling equipment became sound generators, creating vibrations through the moon's surface to confuse Nexus seismic sensors. Maintenance lifts were turned into rapid deployment platforms. Remember, Do-hyun said as they practiced, the Nexus expects perfection. They wait for the perfect shot, the perfect formation, the perfect moment to strike. But we'll never give them that moment. Ta-won was surprised at how quickly the soldiers adapted to the new style. It went against everything they'd been taught about military discipline, but there was something natural about it. Something uniquely human. Sir, Ta-won approached Do-hyun after the training session. I didn't believe this would work at first, but now I see what you're doing. You're not just changing how we fight. You're changing how we think. Do-hyun nodded. The Nexus built their soldiers to be perfect. But perfection has a weakness. It can't handle chaos. And humans, he smiled slightly. We've been surviving chaos since the beginning of our history. A sudden alarm interrupted their conversation. Jai-yun rushed into the room with urgent news. Captain, our long-range sensors have detected something. The Nexus is sending something new, something bigger. They gathered around the sensor display. The image showed a massive ship entering the lunar system. It was unlike the standard Nexus vessels they'd encountered before. It seems they're escalating, Do-hyun said calmly. Good. That means we've got them worried. He turned to address his soldiers. This is what we've trained for. They think they're sending their best to crush us. Instead, they're sending them to learn why humanity has survived every challenge we've ever faced. As Ta-won looked around the room, he saw determination in every face. They were no longer just soldiers following orders. They had become something else, something that even super soldiers couldn't predict or understand. They had become ghosts, and ghosts, as Earth's history had shown countless times, could haunt even the mightiest armies. The massive Nexus command ship cast a long shadow over the lunar surface. Lieutenant Jai-Yun Lee studied the sensor readings with growing concern. This vessel was 3 times larger than any Nexus ship they had encountered before. Energy readings are off the charts, she reported to Captain Do-hyun Park. They'd brought enough firepower to destroy the entire base. Do-hyun remained calm as he reviewed the data. They're not here to destroy us. They're here to understand why their perfect soldiers failed. He turned to Sergeant Ta-won Kim. Are our preparations ready? Yes, sir. All tunnels are set according to your specifications. The modified mining equipment is in place. The base's communication system suddenly crackled to life. A deep, commanding voice filled the control room. This is General Apex of the Nexus Army. Your resistance, while impressive, ends today. Surrender, and we will make your extinction painless. Do-hyun pressed the response button. This is Captain Park. We appreciate your offer, but we must decline. Perhaps we could interest you in a counter-proposal. There was a pause before General Apex responded. You are in no position to make proposals, human. On the contrary, Do-hyun said, his voice steady. We are offering you a chance to learn something your perfect soldiers have never experienced: defeat. The response came in the form of launch signals. Dozens of dropships departed from the command vessel, carrying hundreds of Nexus super soldiers. They're using a new deployment pattern, Jai-yun observed. They've learned from last time. No more centralized landing zones. Do-hyun nodded. Exactly as expected. Begin Phase 1. Across the lunar surface, hidden devices activated. They sent powerful vibrations through the moon's crust, creating false seismic readings. The Nexus dropships, programmed to avoid unstable landing zones, found themselves constantly adjusting their approach. Their computers are trying to find safe landing zones, Ta-won said, but there aren't any. The whole area reads as unstable. Now for Phase 2, Do-hyun ordered. The modified mining lasers, hidden beneath thin layers of lunar dust, fired upward. They didn't target the ships directly. Instead, they heated the vacuum around them. In the extreme temperature difference of space, the sudden heat created unpredictable air currents. The dropships, designed to operate with perfect precision, struggled to maintain their formation. Several collided, their pilots unable to compensate for conditions their training had never covered. Phase 3, Do-hyun commanded. The maintenance robots burst from hidden tunnels, each projecting multiple heat signatures. Hundreds of false targets appeared on Nexus sensors. The super soldiers, finally managing to land, found themselves unable to distinguish real threats from decoys. They're splitting up, Jai-yun reported, breaking their formation to chase the decoys. And now they learn why that was a mistake, Do-hyun said quietly. The human defenders emerged from their hiding spots, using their modified mining tools exactly as they had practiced. In the low gravity, they moved like ghosts, firing and changing position before the Nexus soldiers could lock onto them. Through the base's cameras, they watched as the perfect soldiers struggled. Their enhanced strength worked against them in the low gravity. Their programmed responses, designed for standard combat situations, proved useless against opponents who refused to fight conventionally. Sir, Jai-yun called out, General Apex is sending a personal message. The general's voice was filled with barely controlled rage. What manner of warfare is this? You violate every principle of military engagement. No, General, Do-hyun replied calmly. We're just fighting as humans always have. We adapt. We improvise. We overcome. Your soldiers are perfect, but perfection is predictable. And predictability, in warfare, is a fatal flaw. As if to emphasize his point, another group of Nexus soldiers fell into a carefully prepared trap, their perfect formation becoming their prison as the ground shifted beneath them. This is only the beginning, General, Do-hyun continued. You can send more ships, more soldiers. But you'll find that we humans have something your perfect warriors will never understand: the ability to change the rules of the game. The battle continued across the lunar surface, but now it was the Nexus forces who seemed lost and confused, while the human defenders moved with purpose and precision. They had become something the super soldiers couldn't compute, an enemy that refused to be perfect. Commander He-Jin Choi stood in the command center of Earth's last orbital station, reviewing the reports from Moon Base Epsilon. At first, he had dismissed them as exaggerated. The idea that a small human force could defeat Nexus super soldiers seemed impossible. Yet the evidence was undeniable. "Show me the battle footage again," he ordered his staff. The holographic display came to life, showing Captain Do-hyun Park's forces in action. He-Jin watched carefully as human soldiers used modified mining equipment to outmaneuver the supposedly superior Nexus forces. "Sir," his aide reported, "we're receiving similar reports from other resistance groups. The Mars survivors who escaped to the asteroid bases are using Captain Park's tactics. They're having success against Nexus patrols." He-Jin remembered his first encounter with the Nexus army. Their super soldiers had seemed invincible, cutting through Earth's best defenses as if they were paper. Now, for the first time, he saw hope. "Get me a direct line to Moon Base Epsilon," he ordered. The communication screen lit up, showing Captain Do-hyun's face. The younger officer looked tired but determined. "Commander Choi, this is an unexpected honor." "Captain Park," He-Jin began, "your success against the Nexus forces has caught my attention. I must admit, I was skeptical when I first heard about your methods." "Many people were, sir," Do-hyun replied. "The Nexus expected us to fight like them, to try matching their strength and speed. That was never going to work." "Explain your approach to me," He-Jin requested. "In detail." Do-hyun nodded and began sharing his tactical files. "The key is understanding that the Nexus's greatest strength is also their greatest weakness. They're perfect, too perfect. They can't adapt to chaos because they're programmed to seek order." As Do-hyun explained his strategies, He-Jin's mind raced with possibilities. Every human outpost could implement these tactics. They didn't need special weapons or advanced technology. They just needed to think differently. "Lieutenant Jae-yun," Do-hyun called to someone off-screen, "show the commander the results of our latest engagement." The display split to show new battle footage. A group of Nexus soldiers, each one capable of defeating dozens of regular humans, was retreating in disarray. They had been trapped in a series of tunnels where their enhanced strength and speed meant nothing. "We've started calling it the Ghost Protocol," Do-hyun explained. "We never fight them directly. We use the environment. We use misdirection. We use their own expectations against them." He-Jin made his decision. "Captain Park, I'm ordering all remaining human forces to adopt your tactics. We'll need you to train other commanders in these methods." "Sir," Do-hyun said carefully, "the Nexus will adapt. They're already changing their strategies." "But not fast enough," He-Jin replied. "You've proven that humans can do more than just survive. We can win." Suddenly, alarms began blaring at both Moon Base Epsilon and the orbital station. Lieutenant Jae-yun's voice came through clearly. "Multiple Nexus ships detected. They're launching a coordinated attack on all human positions." The Jin watched as massive Nexus warships appeared on his tactical display. This was their response to Do-hyun's success, an overwhelming show of force. "Captain Park," He-Jin said firmly, "this is the moment. Show us how to fight them. Show us how to be ghosts." Do-hyun's expression was calm and focused. "Yes, sir. All human forces, prepare to implement Ghost Protocol. Remember, they expect us to fight like soldiers. Instead, we'll fight like survivors. We'll fight like humans." As He-Jin watched the human forces prepare for battle, he realized that something fundamental had changed. The fear that had gripped humanity since the Nexus first appeared was gone. In its place was something new: understanding. They finally understood that humanity's greatest weakness, their imperfection, was actually their greatest strength. The Nexus War was about to enter a new phase, and for the first time, humanity was not just fighting for survival. They were fighting to win. General Apex stood on the bridge of his command ship, watching the tactical displays with growing frustration. The humans were not behaving according to any known combat protocols. His perfect soldiers, engineered for victory, were being systematically outmaneuvered by primitives using mining equipment. "Launch all remaining ships," he commanded. "I want Moon Base Epsilon destroyed." Captain Park must not be allowed to spread his tactics any further. The space around the moon lit up as hundreds of Nexus warships moved into attack positions. This was the largest assault force ever assembled by the Nexus army. The ships formed a perfect sphere around the lunar base, following textbook military doctrine. Inside Moon Base Epsilon, Captain Do-hyun Park watched the enemy deployment with careful attention. Lieutenant Jae-yeon Lee worked at her station, analyzing the Nexus formation. "They're positioning their ships exactly as their tactical manuals dictate," Jae-yeon reported. "No variations at all." Do-hyun nodded. "They still haven't learned. Perfection is predictable." He turned to Sergeant Tai-won Kim. "Begin Operation Chaos." Tai-won sent the signal. Across the lunar surface, hundreds of small devices activated. These were simple machines, cobbled together from spare parts and mining equipment. Each one began broadcasting different types of signals: heat signatures, radio waves, motion patterns. The Nexus sensors, designed to detect and analyze everything perfectly, were suddenly overwhelmed with data. Their battlefield computers tried to process every signal, looking for patterns that didn't exist. "Sir," Jae-yeon called out, "Commander Choi is reporting similar actions at all human positions. Every outpost is implementing the Ghost Protocol." The Nexus fleet's perfect formation began to waver. Their ships turned in different directions, each responding to different false signals. The coordinated attack they had planned was falling apart before it began. "Now for Phase 2, Do-hyun said calmly. He activated the base's communication system. "All units, execute random pattern Alpha." Human ships appeared from hidden positions in lunar craters and asteroid fields. They were small vessels, mostly mining ships and cargo haulers converted for combat. But they moved in ways that defied conventional space combat tactics. Instead of maintaining formation, each ship followed its own unpredictable path. General Apex's voice boomed through the communication channels. "What is this chaos? Fight properly, humans. Face us with honor." "General," Do-hyun replied, "this is how humans fight. We adapt. We improvise. We embrace chaos because we understand it. Your perfect soldiers can't defeat us because they don't understand what they're fighting." The battle around the moon became a strange dance. The massive Nexus warships, powerful enough to destroy cities, couldn't lock onto the smaller human vessels that darted between them like insects. The super soldiers, deployed into space in their advanced combat suits, found their targeting systems confused by thousands of false readings. "Sir," Jae-yeon's voice was excited. "The Nexus ships, they're firing on each other. Their automated defense systems can't distinguish between real threats and our decoys." Do-hyun watched as the perfect Nexus formation dissolved into confusion. Their ships, responding to programming they couldn't override, began treating everything as a potential threat. "This is impossible." General Apex's voice was filled with rage. "We are the perfect warriors. We cannot be defeated by such primitive tactics." "That's where you're wrong, General," Do-hyun responded. "Humanity survived countless challenges not by being perfect, but by being adaptable. Your soldiers may be stronger, faster, and smarter than us, but they will never understand one simple truth. Real strength lies in embracing imperfection." The battle continued to unfold, but its outcome was becoming clear. The mighty Nexus fleet, with all its perfect soldiers and advanced technology, was being defeated by an enemy they had dismissed as inferior. an enemy that turned their greatest strength, their perfection, into their greatest weakness. Communications officer Sun Mei Kang sat at her station in Moon Base Epsilon, listening to the Nexus command channels. After weeks of studying their communications, she had begun to understand patterns in their supposedly perfect system. Now, those patterns were showing signs of breaking down. "Captain Park," she called out, "I'm detecting unusual variations in Nexus command frequencies. Their communication structure is becoming unstable." Do-hyun moved to her station, studying the data on her screen. The Nexus Army's command structure was like their soldiers, engineered for perfection. Every order followed exact protocols, every response perfectly timed. But now, those precise patterns were falling apart. "Their psychology is breaking down," Do-hyun explained to Lieutenant Jae-yun Lee and Sergeant Ta-won Kim, who had joined them. The Nexus built their entire society on the idea of perfection. Now that perfection is failing them, they don't know how to respond. Sun Lee adjusted her instruments, focusing on specific command channels. "Sir, listen to this," she said, playing a transmission from a Nexus squad leader. The voice was clearly distressed. "Command, requesting new tactical parameters. Enemy movements do not match any known patterns. Unable to establish optimal response strategy." The response from Nexus Command was equally revealing. "Maintain standard combat protocols. Perfection cannot fail. Deviation from established patterns is not acceptable." "They're trapped by their own programming," Jae-yun observed. "They can't adapt because they're not allowed to be imperfect." Do-hyun nodded. "And that's our greatest advantage. Sun Mai, implement Phase 3 of our communication strategy." Sun Mai began broadcasting carefully crafted messages across Nexus frequencies. These weren't attacks or threats. They were simple status reports from human forces, describing actions that made no tactical sense to the Nexus mind. "Mining equipment repurposed for orbital jumps," one message stated. "Combat units using maintenance tunnels as launch tubes. Lunar dust being collected for shield generation." Each message described something that violated Nexus military doctrine. The super soldiers, programmed to analyze and counter every enemy action, tried to process these impossible tactics. Their enhanced minds, designed to find perfect solutions, couldn't handle situations that defied military logic. "Look at their formations," Ta-won pointed to the tactical display. The Nexus units were showing signs of confusion. Some troops stopped moving entirely, their combat computers overwhelmed by scenarios they couldn't process. "Their entire hierarchy is based on perfect obedience and perfect execution," Do-hyun explained. "When faced with an enemy that refuses to follow military logic, that hierarchy begins to crack." Sun Mai intercepted more Nexus communications. Lower-ranking officers were questioning orders for the first time, unable to reconcile their programming with the chaos they faced. Squad leaders, unable to maintain perfect unit cohesion, began acting independently, something strictly forbidden in their rigid command structure. "Sir," Jae-yun reported, "General Apex is broadcasting on all frequencies. He's ordering all units to reboot their tactical systems." "A desperate move," Do-hyun said. "He thinks the problem is with their combat computers. He can't accept that the real problem is their entire approach to warfare." The reboot order only made things worse. As each Nexus unit temporarily shut down its tactical systems, the carefully maintained links between units broke down. When they came back online, the perfect coordination that made them so formidable was gone. Sun Mi continued broadcasting their carefully crafted messages, each one designed to create more uncertainty in the Nexus ranks. The super soldiers, created to be perfect warriors, were experiencing something entirely new: doubt. "They're beginning to understand," Do-hyun said quietly, watching the chaos spread through enemy ranks. "Perfect soldiers can win battles, but they can't adapt to change. And warfare, like life itself, is constant change." The Nexus Army's greatest strength, their absolute adherence to perfection, had become a fatal weakness. Their rigid minds, unable to process imperfection, were paralyzed by an enemy that embraced chaos as a weapon. General Apex's massive command ship hung in space above Moon Base Epsilon. The once perfect formation of the Nexus fleet had dissolved into chaos. Hundreds of their most advanced warships drifted in confused patterns, their crews unable to process the irregular tactics of the human defenders. Inside the base, Captain Do-hyun Park received an unexpected message. "Sir," Lieutenant Jae-yub Lee reported, "General Apex is requesting a direct meeting. He wants to face you personally." Do-hyun considered this development carefully. "He's finally learning," he said, "but not in the way he thinks. Where does he want to meet?" "The central crater, halfway between our base and his command ship," Jae-yun answered. "He says he wants to understand how an inferior species defeated his perfect army." "Then let's show him," Do-hyun said. He turned to Sergeant Ta-won Kim. "Prepare the modified mining suit. It's time to end this." The lunar surface was eerily quiet as Do-hyun walked to the meeting point. He wore what looked like a simple mining suit, modified with the same tools they had used throughout their resistance. General Apex waited in the crater, his massive combat armor making him tower over the human captain. "Captain Park," Apex's voice boomed through the communication channel. "You have corrupted perfection itself. Your chaos has infected my soldiers. This ends today." Do-hyun stood calmly before the giant figure. "You still don't understand, General. Perfection was never the goal. Adaptation is what makes a species strong." "Enough," Apex roared. "Fight me with honor. Show me the true strength of humanity." "I already am," Do-hyun replied quietly. As Apex raised his massive weapon, Do-hyun activated his mining tools. The lunar dust around them, which had seemed completely still, suddenly erupted in a carefully planned pattern. The dust wasn't random. It had been arranged over hours by dozens of small maintenance robots. Apex's perfect combat systems tried to track every dust particle, attempting to calculate their trajectories. But there were too many variables, too many possibilities. His enhanced mind, trying to find the perfect solution, began to overload. What is this?" Apex stumbled, his movements becoming erratic. "There is no pattern. There must be a pattern." "Life isn't about patterns," General Do-hyun said, using his modified mining tools to move through the dust clouded like a ghost. "It's about learning to dance with chaos." The great general, with all his enhanced strength and speed, spun around helplessly. His perfect sensors could not distinguish the real threat from the thousands of false readings created by the swirling dust. His combat computer frantically tried to calculate optimal responses to a situation that had no optimal solution. "Impossible," Apex raged. "We are perfect. We cannot be defeated by imperfection." "That's exactly why you lost," Do-hyun explained, his voice calm. "You tried to perfect warfare, but warfare, like life itself, is inherently imperfect. Humanity's strength isn't in being the strongest or the fastest. Our strength is in accepting imperfection and learning to thrive in it." As if to prove his point, Do-hyun executed a simple series of movements with his mining tools. Each action seemed random, purposeless. But together, they created a cascade of effects in the lunar dust that completely overwhelmed Apex's combat systems. The mighty general, the pride of the Nexus army, fell to his knees. His perfect mind, unable to process the chaos around him, had finally reached its breaking point. "How?" Apex asked, his voice now quiet. "How did you defeat perfection?" "We didn't defeat perfection, General," Do-hyun answered. "We showed you its limits. A perfect machine can only function in a perfect world. But the universe isn't perfect. It's wild, chaotic, and constantly changing. And those who learn to adapt to that chaos will always survive." Across the solar system, the news spread quickly. The Nexus army, with all its perfect soldiers and advanced technology, had been defeated not by superior weapons or stronger warriors, but by humanity's embrace of imperfection. The super soldiers, unable to adapt to chaos, retreated from human space. Do-hyun stood on the observation deck of Moon Base Epsilon one last time, watching Earth glow in the distance. Humanity had learned an important lesson. True strength lies not in achieving perfection, but in learning to thrive in an imperfect universe.